What if the truth that could change everything came from the smallest voice in the courtroom? Can a mother's love and a child's courage defeat the power of wealth and corruption? When the system is rigged against you, how far would you go to fight for justice? The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. The air smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, the kind that had been sitting too long in the break room. At the center of it all sat Rachel Evans, gripping the armrests of her chair as if they were the only things keeping her together. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the murmurs around her. On the other side of the room, Daniel Evans sat tall and composed, dressed in an expensive navy suit that screamed wealth and privilege. His smirk was subtle but present, a silent declaration of victory before the battle had even begun. Rachel clenched her jaw. He always did this, always made her feel small, but not today. At the judge's bench, Judge Mitchell adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His cold, unreadable expression sent a wave of unease through Rachel. She had heard rumors, whispers about his favoritism toward men like Daniel. Wealthy, well-connected, untouchable. Beside Rachel, her lawyer, Miss Carter, leaned in. "Stay calm," she whispered. "We have the truth on our side." Rachel swallowed hard and nodded. She hoped the truth was enough. Daniel's lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, stood first, exuding arrogance as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, my client, Daniel Evans, is a successful businessman who has provided a stable and luxurious life for his son. He has the resources to give Noah the best opportunities. Meanwhile, Miss Evans," he shot Rachel a condescending glance, "is struggling to make ends meet as a nurse. We are simply looking out for Noah's best interests." Rachel's fingers curled into fists. Best interests? The man barely spent time with Noah. To Daniel, their son was a possession, a trophy to be paraded when it suited him. Ms. Carter stood, her voice steady and strong. "Your Honor, financial stability does not equate to love and care. Rachel Evans has raised Noah with warmth, dedication, and sacrifice. She is his constant, his safe place. A child needs love more than luxury." Rachel glanced at Noah, who sat between the courtroom assistant and a social worker. His small hands clutched his favorite toy car, a comfort object in this unfamiliar place. His blue eyes darted between his parents, confusion and sadness clouding his innocent face. He was too young to understand legal battles, but old enough to feel the weight of what was happening. Judge Mitchell sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ms. Carter, let's be realistic. Money provides stability. Schools, extracurricular activities, healthcare, all of which Mr. Evans can provide with ease. Can your client say the same?" Rachel felt a stab of fear. His tone was already leaning toward Daniel. Ms. Carter, unfazed, responded sharply. "Your Honor, Mr. Evans' financial status does not erase his history of controlling behavior. We have testimonies and evidence that prove his pattern of emotional manipulation." Daniel let out a low chuckle, shaking his head as if the claims were ridiculous. "Your Honor," Mr. Reynolds interjected, "these accusations are baseless. Ms. Evans is simply bitter over the divorce." Rachel's stomach twisted. The narrative was being spun against her, just as she feared. Daniel smirked, knowing his money and influence gave him the upper hand. Rachel wanted to scream. She wanted to shake the judge and make him see past Daniel's well-rehearsed lies, but she had to stay composed. If she broke now, she'd look unstable, just like Daniel wanted. While the adults fought, Noah sat quietly, gripping his toy car even tighter. He had been told to let the grown-ups talk, to let them decide his fate. But something in his little heart told him this wasn't fair. His father was lying. He knew it. Rachel met his gaze, her eyes filled with silent reassurance. No matter what happened, she would fight for him. And deep inside, Noah knew he would fight too. Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself as the courtroom fell into a tense silence. The weight of the battle ahead pressed heavily on her chest, but she couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. Not when her son's future was on the line. Daniel sat across from her, exuding confidence, as if this was just another business deal he was set to win. His lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, adjusted his suit and stepped forward with an air of superiority. "Your Honor," Reynolds began, voice smooth and calculated, "my client is a successful entrepreneur who has built a stable and thriving life. He lives in an affluent neighborhood, sends Noah to the best schools, and ensures that every one of his needs is met." Rachel's jaw tightened as she listened. Daniel made it sound like money was all that mattered. Like her love, her sacrifices, and the sleepless nights spent holding Noah through fevers and nightmares meant nothing. Mr. Reynolds turned toward her, his gaze sharp. "Ms. Evans, can you honestly say you can provide the same level of comfort and security for Noah?" Rachel's lawyer, Ms. Carter, stood before she could respond. Your Honor, stability is not defined by wealth alone. Rachel Evans is a hardworking nurse who has dedicated her life to raising her son with love, care, and consistency. Unlike Mr. Evans, who, she turned to Daniel, spends most of his time traveling for work, leaving Noah in the care of hired help, Daniel scoffed. That's ridiculous. I provide my son with everything he needs. He has the best education, the best environment. But is that what Noah truly needs? Miss Carter interrupted. A house filled with expensive things but no parental warmth? A father who is present only when convenient? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Rachel glanced at Noah, who sat quietly, his small fingers gripping the toy car in his lap. His blue eyes darted between his parents, confusion clouding his young face. Judge Mitchell exhaled, tapping his pen against the desk. Ms. Carter, while emotional arguments have their place, we must focus on practical matters. Financial stability is a crucial factor in custody cases. Rachel's stomach twisted. She knew it. The judge was leaning toward Daniel. Mr. Reynolds smiled slightly, sensing victory. Exactly, Your Honor. My client has already demonstrated his ability to provide an unmatched lifestyle for his son. Ms. Evans, however, has been struggling financially since the divorce. With her demanding job, how will she guarantee Noah the attention and care he deserves? Rachel clenched her fists. I may not have millions in my bank account, but I have always been there for my son. I tuck him in at night. I help him with his homework. I know what makes him laugh, what scares him, what dreams he has for the future. Daniel chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as if she were being dramatic. Mr. Evans, Miss Carter said sharply, do you know what your son's favorite bedtime story is? Or the name of his best friend? Do you even know the last time he was sick? Daniel's smug expression faltered for just a second, but it was enough. Rachel saw it. Noah saw it too. Noah shifted in his seat, his little face scrunching in distress. His tiny fingers tightened around his toy car, his only comfort in this room full of grown-ups deciding his fate. Rachel met his gaze, giving him a reassuring nod. It's okay, sweetheart, she mouthed. But it wasn't okay, because no matter how much love she had for him, she was up against a man who could buy the outcome he wanted. And the judge, he wasn't looking at her with fairness. He was looking at her as a struggling single mother while Daniel was the picture of success. The system was already against her, but Rachel refused to back down. She had one chance to prove that love mattered more than money, and she would fight with everything she had. The courtroom air was thick with tension. Rachel sat rigid in her chair, her heart pounding as she watched Daniel bask in his false confidence. He thought he had already won. He thought his wealth and influence would silence her, but he had no idea what was coming next. Ms. Carter, Rachel's lawyer, stood with calm authority. Your Honor, while Mr. Evans would like us to believe he is a model father, the truth is far more complicated. Daniel scoffed, rolling his eyes. More baseless accusations? I'm getting tired of this. Ms. Carter ignored him and turned toward the judge. I'd like to present new evidence regarding Mr. Evans' character and fitness as a parent. Judge Mitchell folded his hands, his expression neutral but interested. Proceed. Ms. Carter gestured toward a screen where a court assistant set up a projector. Over the past 6 months, Mr. Evans has been involved in multiple incidents that call into question his ability to be a responsible guardian. The first image appeared, a grainy security camera shot of Daniel outside an upscale bar, clearly intoxicated, gripping a woman's arm as she tried to pull away. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Rachel's stomach twisted. She had seen that look in Daniel's eyes before, the one that said, I always get what I want. Ms. Carter didn't stop. This is from 2 months ago. Mr. Evans was involved in a late-night altercation at an exclusive club, requiring security to intervene. Daniel shifted in his seat, his smirk slipping. That's misleading. We're not done. Ms. Carter cut him off, clicking to the next piece of evidence. A police report. Mr. Evans was pulled over for reckless driving 3 months ago. His blood alcohol level was over the legal limit. Gasps echoed through the room. Rachel's hands clenched into fists. Noah had been with him that weekend. She hadn't known. Judge Mitchell's fingers tapped against the desk. For the first time, his expression showed uncertainty. Mr. Evans, do you have an explanation for this? Daniel straightened his suit, trying to regain composure. Your Honor, I admit I went out a few times, but I was never reckless with my son. This is just an attempt to smear my name. Ms. Carter's lips curved into a knowing smirk. You weren't reckless with Noah? Then explain this. She lifted another document. We have a statement from one of Mr. Evans' former employees, detailing his pattern of manipulation and emotional abuse. She witnessed him yelling at Noah during visitation, calling him weak for crying when he missed his mother. Rachel's breath hitched. Noah had never told her that. Daniel's face darkened. This is ridiculous. People will say anything for a paycheck. Ms. Carter arched an eyebrow. Funny, that's exactly what we were thinking when we discovered your payments. The final slide appeared, a bank transaction log. Ms. Carter walked toward the judge, handing him a file. We have reason to believe Mr. Evans attempted to bribe a court official to influence this case. Daniel shot up from his seat. That's a damn lie. Judge Mitchell's eyes scanned the papers, his expression unreadable. But Rachel saw the subtle twitch in his jaw. He recognized the names on the list. Ms. Carter leaned in slightly. Is something wrong, Your Honor? For the first time, Judge Mitchell hesitated. Rachel noticed it. So did Daniel. Noah, sitting quietly, clutched his toy car tightly, his young mind piecing things together. Daniel's confidence was cracking. His voice wavered. This is a desperate move. It means nothing. Ms. Carter didn't blink. Bribery is a crime, Mr. Evans, and influencing a judge, that's a federal offense. Rachel felt her pulse slow for the first time since the trial began. The truth was out. The walls were closing in on Daniel. And by the look on Judge Mitchell's face, Rachel knew. He wasn't as untouchable as he thought. The courtroom had fallen into an uneasy silence. Daniel Evans sat stiffly in his chair, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might snap. Across from him, Rachel held her breath, sensing a shift in the room. The evidence had rattled Daniel, but the judge still hadn't made a ruling. Noah sat beside his mother, his small fingers curled around the sleeve of her blouse. He had been quiet throughout the entire trial, watching, listening, but something about the way his father reacted to the bribery accusations made him tense. Then, as if a dam inside him had finally broken, Noah let go of Rachel's sleeve and stood up. I need to say something. His voice, small yet steady, cut through the courtroom like a knife. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Every head in the room turned toward the little boy. The judge frowned, shifting in his chair. Order in the court, Judge Mitchell said gruffly, clearly displeased by the interruption. Noah, you need to remain seated. But Noah didn't sit. His hands trembled at his sides. Hi, wide brown eyes locking onto the judge. You don't listen to my mom, he said, his voice unwavering. You don't even listen to me. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, rose quickly. Your Honor, this child is confused. He's under emotional distress. Noah turned his sharp gaze to the lawyer. I'm not confused. I heard everything. Rachel placed a hand over her mouth. Judge Mitchell narrowed his eyes. Noah, what do you mean? Noah sucked in a deep breath. Then with the courage only a child could possess, he spoke the truth. Dad said he was going to win no matter what. He said he paid people to make sure of it. Gasps exploded from the courtroom. A woman in the back whispered, Oh my God! Daniel shot out of his seat. That's not true. He's just a kid. Noah turned to his father, his expression blank, but his voice cold. You told Mr. Andrews on the phone that Mommy would never win because the judge already picked a side. Rachel felt her stomach drop. Mr. Andrews, Daniel's business partner. Judge Mitchell's face drained of color. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Ms. Carter was the first to recover. Your Honor, I request that Noah be allowed to continue. Judge Mitchell hesitated. His discomfort was obvious. Finally, he exhaled sharply. Proceed. Noah turned back to his mother. His lip trembled, but he forced himself to be strong. Mommy tried to tell me not to listen when Daddy talks on the phone, but I hear things. I heard him say that money fixes everything, that the court would never let Mommy win. Daniel's face turned a deep shade of red. This is ridiculous. He's making it up. Ms. Carter smiled coolly. A child's imagination, huh? Then tell me, Mr. Evans, why does your phone record show calls to Mr. Andrews during this case? She lifted a document. More evidence? More truth. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. Judge Mitchell looked furious, but not at Rachel, at Daniel. Noah took a shaky breath, his small hands curled into fists. I just want to be with my mom. She takes care of me. She loves me. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. The courtroom was dead silent. Daniel, for the first time, looked genuinely afraid, because the truth had finally been spoken. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Noah's small frame stood in the center of it all, his innocent face holding a determination that seemed far beyond his years. His words had shaken everyone, except Judge Mitchell. The judge cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. He straightened his robe, attempting to regain control of the room. That's enough, he said, his voice colder than before. This is highly inappropriate. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. Ms. Carter, her lawyer, stepped forward immediately. Your Honor, this child just revealed direct evidence of corruption. His testimony should— Judge Mitchell raised a hand, cutting her off. This is a courtroom, not a playground. We do not take statements from children under these circumstances. A murmur spread through the spectators. Noah's little fists clenched at his sides. But I'm telling the truth, he insisted. Judge Mitchell ignored him. Mr. Evans, despite this interruption, I see no reason to delay my ruling. The court has already reviewed the facts. Rachel shot up from her seat. Reviewed the facts? She repeated, her voice trembling with controlled rage. My son just told you that his father is bribing people, and you're still ignoring it? Judge Mitchell's eyes flashed with irritation. Ms. Evans, sit down. Rachel stood her ground. No. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Judge Mitchell narrowed his eyes. Excuse me? Ms. Carter jumped in, her voice sharp. Your Honor, you have a legal obligation to investigate these claims. If you refuse, I will have no choice but to escalate this case to a higher court. A flicker of something— panic— crossed Judge Mitchell's face. Daniel Evans, still red-faced from Noah's revelation, slammed a hand on the table. This is ridiculous. He's a child. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Noah whipped around to face his father. His small voice rang out, filled with more authority than anyone expected. Then why are you scared, Dad? The room went still. Daniel flinched. I'm not scared. Noah tilted his head. Then let them check your phone. Rachel's breath caught. Ms. Carter smiled. An excellent suggestion. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I request an immediate subpoena of Mr. Evans's phone records. Judge Mitchell hesitated. He was running out of ways to suppress this. Then Noah took another step forward, his little hands gripping the podium. He stared directly at Judge Mitchell, his eyes glistening with tears, but filled with strength. You didn't even look at me when I was talking, Noah said softly. The judge blinked, visibly caught off guard. You looked at my dad the whole time, but not me, Noah continued. You didn't care what I said. You never even asked if I was— Rachel felt a lump rise in her throat. The courtroom held its breath as Noah spoke the words that would change everything. You were never going to let Mommy win, were you? The judge's face paled. Someone in the back of the courtroom whispered, Oh my God! Rachel felt the world tilt. Ms. Carter seized the moment. Your Honor, if there is any integrity left in this courtroom, you will allow this evidence to be reviewed. The pressure was closing in. The weight of the truth was too much to ignore. Judge Mitchell, for the first time, looked nervous. Daniel, once so smug, now seemed smaller, his arrogance crumbling. Noah sniffled and wiped his nose. I just want to be with my mom, he whispered. And with those words, the entire courtroom knew the game was over. A heavy silence hung over the courtroom. Judge Mitchell's face was unreadable, but the tension in his clenched jaw was obvious. Rachel could see it, the cracks in his confidence. Ms. Carter seized the moment. Your Honor, this court has an obligation to investigate corruption. I am formally requesting a subpoena of Mr. Evans's phone and financial records. Daniel shot up from his seat, his voice sharp with desperation. This is absurd. My phone is private property. You can't— The judge slammed his gavel. Sit down, Mr. Evans. Daniel hesitated, his hands shaking, then reluctantly sank back into his chair. A new voice broke through the room. I can help with that. Heads turned as a journalist, seated quietly in the back, stood up. He adjusted his press badge and held up a small notepad. I'm James Calloway, investigative reporter with the Herald, he said. I've been looking into court bribery cases for months, and guess what? Daniel Evans's name is all over my research. The room erupted. Gasps and hushed whispers filled the air. Rachel gripped the edge of the table, her pulse racing. Could this really be happening? Judge Mitchell's face went pale. This is highly inappropriate. James ignored him. I have proof that Mr. Evans made multiple payments to a private account linked to a certain judge's campaign fund, and those payments just happened to line up with every legal victory Mr. Evans has had in custody battles. Rachel's breath hitched. How many other women had he done this to? The bailiffs exchanged looks, suddenly uncertain about whose orders they were following. Ms. Carter wasted no time. Your Honor, given these new developments, I am requesting an immediate review of Mr. Evans's financial transactions. If there is any legitimacy to these claims, this entire case is compromised. Daniel slammed his fists on the table. This is a witch hunt. These are just accusations. James Calloway smiled and pulled out his phone. Not just accusations. Here's a bank statement showing a $50,000 transfer to Judge Mitchell's private account, dated 2 weeks before this trial began. The courtroom exploded. A commotion erupted as spectators murmured, reporters scribbled frantically, and even the bailiffs looked unsure about what to do next. Judge Mitchell gripped the bench, his hands visibly shaking. "Order! I demand order in this courtroom!" Rachel stared at Daniel. His once confident smirk had vanished. For the first time she saw it. Fear. Noah, sitting quietly beside her, looked up and whispered, "Mommy, did we win?" Rachel blinked back tears and squeezed his hand. "Not yet, baby, but we will." Judge Mitchell, still pale, swallowed hard and cleared his throat. Court is adjourned until further notice. But everyone in that room knew. The truth was finally out. Judge Mitchell stormed out of the courtroom, his face tense, his grip on the gavel unusually tight. The murmurs in the room hadn't died down. Reporters whispered urgently into their phones, and even the bailiff seemed hesitant to follow orders. Rachel sat frozen in her seat. Had this really happened? Had Daniel's lies finally begun to unravel? Ms. Carter turned to her, her expression unreadable. "Rachel, this is bigger than we thought." Noah clutched his mother's sleeve. "What happens now?" Rachel exhaled slowly, forcing a smile. "Now, sweetheart, we wait for the truth to come out." The next morning, news of the courtroom bombshell had spread everywhere. Judge Mitchell's office blinds were drawn shut. Daniel had gone silent, but behind closed doors, an emergency judicial review had been launched. Investigators combed through bank statements, wire transfers, and courtroom rulings. The evidence stacked up fast, and it wasn't just Daniel. Ms. Carter's phone buzzed that afternoon. She glanced at the caller ID and picked up immediately. "Tell me you have something." The voice on the other end was urgent. "It's worse than we thought. Judge Mitchell has taken bribes in multiple custody cases. Daniel wasn't his first client." Ms. Carter's grip tightened on her phone. "How many?" "At least 6, and counting." Rachel's heart pounded as she listened. How many mothers had lost their children because of this MA? By the next court session, the energy in the room had completely shifted. Judge Mitchell walked in looking visibly shaken. His usual confidence had been replaced by something else. Fear. Ms. Carter stood. "Your Honor, before we proceed with this case, I have new evidence to submit." She handed over a thick file. "These are financial statements linking Mr. Evans to fraudulent transactions involving your judicial account." The judge's fingers twitched as he flipped through the pages. The numbers, the dates, it was undeniable. Daniel shot up from his seat. "This is a setup. You're trying to destroy me." Ms. Carter didn't flinch. "Actually, you did that all by yourself." Judge Mitchell's voice came out hoarse. "We will take a recess." But the bailiffs were already moving. A man in a dark suit entered the courtroom, an ethics investigator. "Your Honor, you are officially under review by the State Judiciary Board." Daniel's face drained of color. "You can't do this to me." The investigator's expression remained cold. "We already have." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She reached for Noah's hand, squeezing it tight. For the first time, in what felt like forever, she saw it. The end of the nightmare. The truth was finally setting them free. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Judge Mitchell's hands trembled as he shuffled the papers in front of him. But it was clear. There was no escaping the truth. The evidence was overwhelming. Daniel Evans sat frozen, his usual smug confidence replaced by something else. Panic. His perfectly tailored suit suddenly felt too tight, his collar suffocating. Rachel held Noah close, her pulse racing. Could this really be happening? Was justice finally catching up to the man who had tried to destroy her? The ethics investigator stepped forward, his voice steady and unshaken. "Mr. Evans, our preliminary investigation has confirmed multiple financial transactions linking you to judicial bribery." Daniel scoffed, shaking his head. "This is absurd. You think I'd be stupid enough to—" The investigator didn't let him finish. "We have bank records, wire transfers, and testimony from a court employee who witnessed your interactions with Judge Mitchell. This isn't a setup, Mr. Evans. This is accountability." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Reporters furiously jotted down notes. The judge wiped sweat from his brow. He could feel the walls closing in. Daniel slammed his hands on the table, his voice rising. "Do you know who I am? I built businesses from the ground up. I have connections." Ms. Carter smirked. "Yes, and you used them to manipulate the court system. But here's the thing, Mr. Evans. Money can't buy you everything." Daniel turned to Judge Mitchell, expecting some kind of lifeline. But the judge only looked away, as if distancing himself from the sinking ship that was Daniel Evans. Then, the final blow came. The investigator cleared his throat. "Given the overwhelming evidence, a criminal inquiry into your financial dealings will begin immediately. You may also be facing charges for attempting to obstruct justice." Daniel's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this to me." He turned to Rachel, his anger spilling over. You think this changes anything? You'll never be more than a struggling nobody. You… Enough. Rachel's voice was calm, steady, but there was something behind it, something powerful. She met Daniel's eyes, unflinching. Noah and I don't have to live in fear of you anymore. You lost today, Daniel. Not just in this courtroom, but in life. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came, because he knew she was right. The judge finally spoke, his voice weaker than before. This case will proceed with a new judge overseeing it. Mr. Evans, you are hereby stripped of any legal advantage in this custody dispute. Noah tugged on Rachel's sleeve, whispering, Mommy, does this mean we're safe now? Rachel ran a hand through his soft curls, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Yes, baby, we're safe. And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. The courtroom was silent. Every breath, every shift of a chair, every rustle of paper felt deafening. Rachel sat stiffly, her hands clasped together, her knuckles white. Noah, tucked against her side, held onto her arm, his small fingers gripping tightly. Across the room, Daniel sat hunched forward, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. The new judge, a composed and fair woman named Judge Lawson, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. After reviewing all the evidence, including testimonies, financial records, and the integrity of this case, I am ready to deliver my ruling. Rachel inhaled sharply, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Judge Lawson continued, her voice unwavering. It is clear that Mr. Evans has engaged in unethical behavior, including bribery attempts that call into question the legitimacy of his custody claim. It is also evident that Miss Evans, despite financial hardships, has consistently provided a stable, loving environment for Noah. Daniel's hands curled into fists, but he said nothing. He knew speaking out of turn now would only make things worse. Noah, wide-eyed, looked up at the judge. Rachel could feel his tiny body trembling against her. Judge Lawson looked directly at the boy, her expression softening. Noah, I want you to know that your voice mattered in this courtroom, and today, justice will reflect that. She turned back to the attorneys. Full custody is awarded to Ms. Rachel Evans, effective immediately. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by murmurs, but Rachel heard none of it. Her breath caught in her throat, her vision blurred with tears. Did she just… Then the words sank in. She had won. Noah's arms flung around Rachel's waist as he buried his face in her stomach. We did it, Mommy, he whispered. Rachel clutched him, her body shaking with relief. Yes, baby, we did, Judge Lawson continued, her voice firm. Mr. Evans will be granted supervised visitation only. Any further legal violations on his part will result in immediate termination of those rights. Daniel shot to his feet, his face red with fury. This is a joke. You can't take my son from me. Judge Lawson's eyes turned cold. Sit down, Mr. Evans. This court does not tolerate outbursts. Daniel's lawyer grabbed his arm, urging him to comply. Realizing he had no power left, Daniel slumped back into his chair, breathing hard through his nose. His empire had crumbled, his influence reduced to nothing. As Rachel and Noah exited the courtroom, a rush of reporters and onlookers swarmed them, eager for a statement. Rachel shielded Noah, whispering, Let's go home. Noah looked up at her, his small voice filled with innocence and pride. Mommy, does this mean we're free? Rachel smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, sweetheart, we're free. And for the first time in years, she truly felt it. The courthouse doors swung open as Rachel stepped outside, Noah's small hand wrapped tightly in hers. The crisp autumn air hit her face, but it felt different now, lighter, freer. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking under the shadow of Daniel's control. Reporters swarmed toward them, microphones and flashing cameras in hand. Ms. Evans, how does it feel to win custody? What would you say to women fighting similar battles? Noah, how do you feel about the verdict? Rachel knelt to Noah's level, gently brushing his hair back. We don't have to answer anything, baby. Noah, still gripping his toy car, looked up at the sea of faces, then back at his mother. He smiled softly. I just feel safe. Rachel felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to spill. She kissed his forehead, whispering, That's all that matters. She stood up, squeezing his hand, and without another word, they walked past the crowd, leaving behind the chaos, the court, and Daniel's toxic grip on their lives. Daniel sat alone, shoulders hunched, staring blankly at the empty courtroom. His expensive suit, once a symbol of power, now felt suffocating. His lawyer whispered frantically beside him, but he wasn't listening. The consequences of his actions were closing in. Judge Mitchell, the same man who once seemed untouchable, was now under investigation. The bribes, the manipulation, the corruption, it had all come crashing down. And Daniel? He was at the center of it. His empire had cracked. His influence was gone. And Rachel had walked away with the one thing he could never control, Noah's love. Rachel and Noah stood in front of their new home, a small, cozy house with a white picket fence. It wasn't a mansion like Daniel's estate, but it was theirs, safe, peaceful, a fresh start. Noah ran through the front yard, laughing as he chased a butterfly. Rachel watched him, hand on her heart, taking in the simple joy of the moment. Her phone buzzed. It was her lawyer, Ms. Carter. Rachel, I just wanted to let you know, Daniel's facing fraud charges. The judge's corruption is being fully investigated. This case is making national headlines. People are talking about reform. Rachel exhaled, closing her eyes. Justice. Thank you, Ms. Carter, for everything. You fought for this, Rachel. You won. Rachel hung up and turned to Noah, who was waiting for her with wide, eager eyes. Mommy, are we really free now? She scooped him into her arms, holding him close. Yes, baby, she whispered. We're free. And for the first time in her life, she truly believed it.